Welcome back to the Historian's Tome. I'm so glad you're here with us tonight. Before we begin our journey into the ancient mysteries of Stonehenge and Britain's distant past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us create more content for you.
I'm curious, where are you watching from right now?
What time is it there? Are you settling in for the night, or perhaps listening during a quiet afternoon? Wherever you are, whatever time it is, get comfortable. Adjust your pillows, let your breathing slow, and prepare to drift off as we explore one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Let's begin. In the rolling green countryside of southern England, there stands a monument that has puzzled humanity for thousands of years. Stonehenge rises from Salisbury Plain like a giant's forgotten toy, its massive stones arranged in circles that speak of purposes we can only imagine. These aren't ordinary rocks. They're enormous blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 25 tons, arranged with such precision that even today we struggle to understand how they got there. Close your eyes and picture yourself standing on that plain. The grass beneath your feet is soft and slightly damp from morning dew. The sky above stretches wide and endless, that particular shade of grey-blue that belongs only to the English countryside. And before you, the stones rise up, weathered and ancient, covered in pale lichens that have grown there for centuries. They're not perfectly shaped. Time has worn them rough and pitted, but they stand as they have stood for more than 4,000 years. The largest stones at Stonehenge are called sarsens. They're a type of sandstone that formed millions of years ago, long before humans walked the earth. Each sarsen stone is massive, averaging around 13 feet tall and weighing about 25 tons. Think about that weight for a moment. 25 tons is roughly the same as 8 full-grown elephants, or 6 average cars stacked on top of each other. And the people who built Stonehenge moved these stones without wheels, without metal tools, without any of the machinery we take for granted today. These sarsen stones came from the Marlborough Downs, a range of hills about 20 miles north of Stonehenge. 20 miles might not sound like much when you can drive it in half an hour, but imagine moving a 25-ton stone that distance using only ropes, wooden rollers, and human muscle. Recent archaeological work suggests it might have taken 500 people to move just one stone, pulling together in careful coordination. The journey would have taken weeks, perhaps months, depending on the weather and the condition of the ground. But the sarsens weren't the only stones used at Stonehenge. Inside the great circle of sarsen stones, there's another ring made of smaller stones called bluestones. Don't let the name smaller fool you. These stones still weigh between 2 and 5 tons each. What makes the bluestones remarkable isn't just their size, but where they came from. For decades, geologists have known that these particular rocks don't exist anywhere near Salisbury Plain. They come from the Silbury Hills in Wales, more than 140 miles away. 140 miles. Let that distance sink in as you relax deeper into your pillow. Imagine the determination it would take to bring 80 of these stones across that distance. The route from Wales to Stonehenge crosses some of the most challenging terrain in Britain. Steep hills, dense forests, wide rivers, all without bridges or paved roads. Some researchers believe the stones were transported by water whenever possible, loaded onto rafts and floated along rivers and the coast. Others think they were dragged overland, an even more staggering feat of organization and endurance. Why would ancient people go to such extraordinary length? What could possibly have made it worthwhile to transport stones across such vast distances? These questions have echoed through the centuries, and we still don't have complete answers. But we do know that Stonehenge was important, more important than we can easily comprehend from our modern perspective. The building of Stonehenge wasn't a single project. It happened in stages over more than 1,500 years. Think about that time span for a moment. 1,500 years is longer than the entire history of England from the Norman conquest in 1066 to today. It's as if someone started building a monument before the Roman Empire fell and their descendants were still adding to it during the Renaissance. Generation after generation returned to this site, each adding their own contributions to a vision that stretched far beyond any single lifetime. The first stage of Stonehenge, built around 3000 BCE, was actually quite simple. It was a circular ditch with a bank of earth inside it, about 360 feet across. This doesn't sound like much compared to the massive stones we see today, but digging that ditch was hard work. The builders used tools made from deer antlers to break up the chalk bedrock, then scooped out the loosened rock using the shoulder blades of cattle as shovels. They created a boundary, a sacred space marked off from the ordinary world around it. Inside this circular enclosure, they dug 56 pits arranged in a circle. These are called the Aubrey holes, named after John Aubrey, a 17th century writer who first described them. For years, archaeologists thought these holes once held wooden posts, but more recent excavations have revealed something more poignant. The Aubrey holes contain cremated human remains, the ashes of at least 63 individuals carefully buried over several centuries. Stonehenge began its life as a cemetery, a place where communities brought their dead to rest in this specially marked ground. 500 years passed. Generations lived and died, seasons turned, and the circular bank and ditch gradually weathered and filled with soil. Then around 2500 BCE, something changed. This was the beginning of Stonehenge's most dramatic transformation, the era when the great stones arrived. No one knows exactly why this generation decided to rebuild Stonehenge with stone. Perhaps new religious ideas had spread across Britain. Perhaps this community had grown wealthy and powerful enough to organize such a massive project. Perhaps they wanted to create something permanent, something that would last for their children's children's children to see. Whatever their reasons, they began the monumental task of bringing the bluestones from Wales. Picture the scene as these stones arrived at Salisbury Plain. Hundreds of people would have been involved in moving each stone, pulling on ropes, levering the stones over wooden rollers,
shouting encouragement to each other.
When a stone finally reached its destination, the real precision work began. The builders had to dig a hole exactly the right size and shape, then maneuver the multi-ton stone into position. They used ropes and wooden frameworks to tilt each stone upright, then packed the hole with smaller rocks and chalk to hold it steady. The bluestones were arranged in a double circle, creating an inner sanctum within the ancient earthwork. But this design didn't last long. Within a few generations, the builders changed their minds. They dismantled the bluestone circles and began an even more ambitious project, the Great Sarsen Circle that defines Stonehenge today. Bringing the sarsen stones from the Marlborough Downs required even more effort than transporting the bluestones. The route was shorter, but the stones were much heavier. Archaeological experiments have shown that it probably took at least 1,000 people to move just one sarsen stone. 1,000 people pulling together, keeping their rhythm, moving at a pace of barely a mile per day. Once the sarsens reached Stonehenge, the builders had to shape them. They used smaller stones called hammerstones to pound the surfaces of the sarsens, gradually shaping them into more regular forms. If you could hear the building of Stonehenge, you would hear a constant rhythmic tapping, dozens of workers hammering away at a single stone, day after day, for months. The sound would have echoed across the plain, a declaration that something important was happening here. The outer circle of Stonehenge consists of 30 upright sarsen stones with a continuous ring of stone lintels laid on top. These lintels, the horizontal stones that connect the uprights, each weigh about 7 tons. Lifting them into position more than 13 feet off the ground was an engineering feat that still impresses us today. The builders probably constructed earthen ramps, gradually raising each lintel until they could slide it onto the top of the uprights. What's truly remarkable is how carefully the builders shaped these stones to fit together. The lintels have curved inner and outer faces so they form a perfect circle. The uprights have protruding knobs on top, and the lintels have corresponding holes carved into their undersides, creating a joint that lock the stones together. This technique is called mortise and tenon joinery, and it's more commonly seen in woodworking. The fact that Stonehenge's builders used it with multi-ton stones shows an extraordinary level of planning and skill. Inside the sarsen circle, the builders created an even more impressive structure, 5 massive trilithons arranged in a horseshoe shape. A trilithon is simply 2 upright stones with a lintel across the top, like a giant doorway. The largest of these trilithons stands at the head of the horseshoe, its uprights rising 24 feet above the ground. This great trilithon frames the view toward the northeast, the direction where the sun rises on the summer solstice. The bluestones weren't abandoned when the sarsens arrived. They were rearranged again, placed in an oval inside the sarsen circle, then later repositioned into the horseshoe and circle patterns we see today. Some of the bluestones show signs of careful shaping. A few have been carved into columns, others into elegant obelisk shapes. Clearly, these stones held special meaning for the builders, worthy of all the effort required to bring them from Wales and to work them into specific forms as you lie here. Breathing slowly, imagine the finished monument at its peak. 30 massive stones form the outer circle, their grey surfaces bright in the sun. The lintels stretch between them, creating a continuous ring high above the ground. Inside, the 5 great trilithons stand like doorways to another world, and among them, the smaller but still impressive bluestones, brought from a distant land for reasons we can only guess. Stonehenge would have dominated the landscape in ways we can barely appreciate today. Now it's surrounded by roads, visitor centres, and the scattered marks of modern life. But 4,000 years ago, this plain was wild and open. The monument would have been visible for miles, a statement of human achievement rising from the grass. At night, the stones would have stood as dark silhouettes against the stars, mysterious and imposing. We don't know exactly what ceremonies took place at Stonehenge. We can't hear the chants or prayers that once echoed between these stones.
But we know people came here.
They came from across Britain, bringing their dead for burial, gathering for festivals and rituals, marking the turning of the seasons. Stonehenge was a focal point, a place where earth and sky seemed to meet, where the ordinary world gave way to something sacred and eternal. Who were the people who built Stonehenge? What were their lives like? For many years, Stonehenge seemed to exist in isolation, as if it had been built by mysterious strangers who vanished without a trace. But modern archaeology has painted a different picture. The builders of Stonehenge were part of thriving communities with rich cultures and complex beliefs. They were farmers and herders, craftspeople and astronomers, parents and children who laughed and argued and told stories around evening fires. Let your breathing slow even more as we step back in time to meet these ancient Britons. Close your eyes and imagine yourself transported 5,000 years into the past, to the Neolithic period, the new Stone Age. The landscape looks different now. Dense forests of oak, ash and hazel cover much of southern Britain. But here on Salisbury Plain, people have been clearing the land for generations. They've cut down trees and burned the undergrowth, creating open grassland where they can graze their cattle and sheep. The people who began building Stonehenge around 3000 BCE were among the first farmers in Britain. For hundreds of thousands of years before this, humans in Britain had lived as hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, following herds of deer and wild cattle. But around 4000 BCE, something revolutionary happened. Farming arrived in Britain, brought by people migrating from continental Europe. They brought seeds of wheat and barley, herds of domestic cattle and sheep, and the knowledge of how to plant crops and tend animals. This change in how people lived was enormous. Hunter-gatherers moved constantly, carrying everything they owned. Farmers stayed in one place, at least for part of the year. They built permanent houses, stored grain for the winter, and accumulated possessions. Farming allowed populations to grow because food supplies were more reliable. It also meant that not everyone had to spend all their time finding food. Some people could specialize in other skills like making pottery, weaving cloth, or organizing community projects. The farmers of Neolithic Britain lived in small villages scattered across the landscape. Their houses were simple but sturdy, made from wooden posts with walls of woven branches plastered with clay. The roofs were thatched with reeds or straw. Inside there might be a central hearth for cooking and warmth, sleeping platforms along the walls, and storage areas for grain and tools. These weren't large houses. Most were just a single room, perhaps 20 feet across, where an entire family ate, slept, and worked. Life revolved around the seasons and the work they demanded. In spring, people plowed their fields using simple wooden plows, sometimes tipped with stone. They planted wheat and barley, crops that had first been domesticated thousands of years earlier in the Middle East. Summer meant tending the growing crops, weeding fields, watching for birds and animals that might damage the harvest. It also meant caring for herds of cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, moving them to fresh pastures, protecting them from wolves. Autumn was harvest time, when everyone worked together to bring in the grain before bad weather arrived. They cut the stalks with flint sickles, bundled them together, and carried them to the village. There, they threshed the grain by beating it to separate the seeds from the stalks, then winnowed it by tossing it in the air so the wind could blow away the chaff. Finally, they stored the precious grain in pits or large pottery vessels, their insurance against winter hunger. Winter was a quieter time, though there was always work to be done. People repaired tools and made new ones, turning lumps of flint into sharp blades and scrapers through patient, skillful chipping. They wove cloth on simple looms, creating fabric from wool and plant fibers. They carved wood and bone into tools and ornaments. And they told stories, passing down knowledge and traditions from one generation to the next. These communities were close-knit. Everyone knew everyone else. People married partners from neighboring villages, creating networks of family relationships that connected communities across the region. When someone died, it affected the entire group. And when major projects like Stonehenge needed doing, these family networks became crucial for organizing large numbers of people. The society that built Stonehenge wasn't egalitarian in the way we might imagine for such an ancient time. Archaeological evidence shows clear differences in wealth and status. Some people were buried with beautiful stone tools, polished axes, and jewelry. Others had simpler burials with few or no grave goods. Some individuals, presumably leaders or people with special religious roles, warranted burial in prominent locations like the Silbury Holes at Stonehenge. Yet the level of cooperation required to build Stonehenge suggests these societies also valued working together. No single chief or king could have commanded enough workers to move those massive stones. The project must have been a communal effort, with multiple communities agreeing to contribute labor. Perhaps different villages took turns sending work crews. Perhaps the work was tied to religious festivals, with people gathering not just to labor, but to celebrate and reinforce their shared beliefs. What did these people believe? We can only guess based on the evidence they'd left behind. Stonehenge itself, with its careful alignment to astronomical events, suggests they paid close attention to the movements of the sun and moon. Many ancient cultures saw these celestial bodies as gods or as expressions of divine power. The reliability of their movements, the sun rising each day, the moon waxing and waxing, provided a sense of order in an unpredictable world. The people of Neolithic Britain also clearly cared deeply about their ancestors. They didn't just bury their dead and forget them. They returned to burial sites again and again, adding new burials, moving bones, performing rituals. Some burial chambers were used for hundreds of years, becoming repositories of ancestral bones where the living could go to connect with those who came before. Stonehenge fits into this pattern. The cremated remains in the Silbury Holes span several centuries, suggesting that generation after generation, chose this as a final resting place for selected individuals. Perhaps these were community leaders, or people with special spiritual roles, or simply beloved family members. The reasons might have varied, but the pattern is clear. Stonehenge was a place where the living and the dead came together. Around 2500 BCE, as the great stones were being erected, Britain was experiencing another wave of change. New groups of people were arriving from continental Europe, bringing with them new technologies and customs. These newcomers are sometimes called the Beaker people, named after a distinctive type of pottery they made, bell-shaped beakers decorated with patterns of lines and dots. The Beaker people brought metallurgy to Britain. For the first time, people began working copper and gold, heating ore in hot fires and hammering it into tools and ornaments. These early metal objects weren't very practical. Copper is too soft to make good tools, but they were prestigious. Having a copper knife or gold ornament marked you as someone important, someone with connections to distant places where these metals came from. Genetic studies of ancient bones have revealed something surprising. The Beaker people largely replaced the earlier Neolithic population in Britain. This wasn't necessarily a violent conquest. It might have happened gradually over many generations through intermarriage and migration. But by 2000 BCE, most people in Britain had more ancestry from these newcomers than from the farmers who first built Stonehenge. Yet Stonehenge itself continued to be important. The Beaker people didn't abandon it. Instead, they kept using it, modifying it, adding to it. This suggests that whatever Stonehenge meant, whatever purposes it served, those meanings were powerful enough to transcend the changing population. The site maintained its sacred status through times of enormous cultural change. Daily life during the peak of Stonehenge's construction was hard by modern standards, but it wasn't all toil and struggle. Archaeological evidence gives us glimpses of joy and creativity. People made beautiful objects, not just for practical use, but for aesthetic pleasure. They carved intricate designs into pottery and stone. They made jewelry from shells, bones, and precious stones. They almost certainly played music, though the instruments they used, probably drums, flutes, and rattles, have rarely survived. Near Stonehenge, archaeologists have found evidence of large feasts. At a site called Durrington Walls, just 2 miles from Stonehenge, excavations uncovered enormous quantities of animal bones, mostly from pigs. Chemical analysis of these bones showed the pigs came from all over Britain, from as far away as Scotland. This suggests that Durrington Walls was a gathering place where people came from distant regions, bringing animals to slaughter for communal feasts. These weren't everyday meals. The sheer quantity of bones, representing thousands of pigs, shows these were special occasions. Perhaps people gathered at midwinter or midsummer, times when Stonehenge's alignment with the sun was most meaningful. They would have camped around Durrington Walls, hundreds or perhaps thousands of people coming together. During the day, they might have worked on Stonehenge, moving stones or shaping them. In the evenings, they feasted and celebrated, strengthening the bonds between different communities. Imagine those gatherings as you relaxed deeper into rest. Picture campfires dotting the plain as far as you can see. Smell the smoke and the roasting meat. Hear the murmur of hundreds of conversations, laughter, children playing, dogs barking. In the distance, the partially completed Stonehenge rises against the sky, silhouetted by the setting sun. Tomorrow, there will be more work to do, more stones to move, but tonight is for celebration and community. These moments of shared purpose and shared joy were what made Stonehenge possible. The monument wasn't built by slaves forced to labor under harsh overseers. It was built by communities who believed in what they were creating, who found meaning in the work itself. They were building something that would outlast them, something that connected them to their ancestors and to the cosmos itself. Breathe slowly and deeply as we explore one of Stonehenge's most fascinating aspects, its relationship with the sky. From the moment you first see Stonehenge, you might notice it isn't randomly oriented. The horseshoe of trilithons opens to the northeast, facing toward a specific point on the horizon.
This isn't an accident.
Stonehenge is, among other things, an astronomical observatory built by people who watched the heavens with careful attention. Let your mind drift upward, away from the stones themselves, up into the sky above Salisbury Plain. 4,000 years ago, this sky was darker than anything most of us experience today. There were no city lights, no street lamps, no electric glow on the horizon. On a clear night, the stars appeared in countless thousands, so many that the Milky Way looked like a river of light flowing across the darkness. For ancient people, the sky wasn't just beautiful, it was essential. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars marked the passage of time. They told farmers when to plant and when to harvest. They guided travelers across unfamiliar land. They formed the basis of religious beliefs about the order and structure of the universe. And the people who built Stonehenge understood these movements with impressive precision. The most famous astronomical alignment at Stonehenge relates to the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. On this day, which falls around June 21st, the sun rises at its most northerly point on the horizon. And at Stonehenge, if you stand in the center of the monument and look northeast, through the horseshoe of trilithons, you see the sun rise directly over a large standing stone called the heel stone. This alignment is so precise it cannot be accidental. The builders of Stonehenge planned it deliberately. They marked the spot where the sun would rise on that special day, then arranged their massive stones to frame that moment. Imagine the experience of standing at Stonehenge on summer solstice morning 4,000 years ago. You arrive in darkness with hundreds of other people. Everyone is quiet, waiting. The eastern horizon begins to glow. Then, exactly where you expect it, the sun appears, rising over the heel stone. Its light streaming through the great stone archways into the heart of the monument. This would have been more than just a pretty sight. It was confirmation that the world worked the way it should. The sun had reached its furthest point and would now begin its journey back. Days would start getting shorter, leading eventually to autumn and winter. But this was natural and expected, part of the endless cycle that governed life. By marking this moment so dramatically, Stonehenge helped people feel connected to that larger cycle. The summer solstice alignment gets most of the attention, but Stonehenge relates to the winter solstice too. On the shortest day of the year, around December 21st, the sun sets in the southwest, directly opposite to where it rises on the summer solstice. If you stand at the center of Stonehenge during winter solstice sunset, you see the sun sinking down in line with the central gap in the horseshoe of trilithons. Some archaeologists believe the winter solstice might actually have been more important to Stonehenge's builders than the summer one. Midwinter was a critical time for ancient communities. Food stores were running low. The cold weather made life difficult. The days were short and dark. Having a monument that marked the winter solstice, the point after which the days would begin to lengthen again, would have provided hope and reassurance. The sun would return. Spring would come. Life would continue. Evidence from Durrington Walls supports this idea. The pig bones found there, remember those thousands of pigs brought from across Britain, date to midwinter. People were gathering at the darkest, coldest time of year, feasting together, and presumably conducting ceremonies at Stonehenge. Perhaps they were celebrating the sun's return, or asking the gods to ensure it would return, or simply marking this important turning point in the year. But Stonehenge's astronomical sophistication doesn't stop with the solstices. The monument also seems to track the moon. The moon's movements are more complex than the sun's. While the sun follows the same annual pattern year after year, the moon has multiple cycles. It takes about 29 days to go through its phases from new moon to full moon and back. But there's another cycle too, one that takes 18.6 years to complete. This longer cycle relates to where the moon rises and sets on the horizon. Just as the sun rises at different points depending on the season, the moon's rising and setting points shift over time. Every 18.6 years, the moon reaches its most extreme positions, rising and setting at its most northerly and southerly points on the horizon. This is called the lunar standstill, and some researchers believe Stonehenge was designed to mark these events. The Aubrey holes, those 56 pits arranged in a circle, might have served as a counting system for tracking lunar cycles. By moving markers from hole to hole, observers could keep track of where the moon was in its various cycles. This would have required patient observation over many years, even decades, but ancient societies had the time and motivation to do this. Understanding the moon's movements might have been important for religious reasons, or for practical ones like predicting tides if they fished in coastal areas. Other stone circles in Britain show astronomical alignments too, suggesting this was a widespread practice. At Callanish in Scotland, a cross-shaped arrangement of stones creates multiple sight lines to various points on the horizon, where the sun and moon rise and set at different times of year. At Avebury, another massive stone circle just north of Stonehenge, the arrangement of stones seems to relate to the equinoxes, the 2 times each year when day and night are equal in length. Why were ancient people so interested in astronomy? One reason was practical. Knowing the time of year was essential for farming. Plant too early and frost might kill your crops. Plant too late and they won't ripen before winter comes. The sun's position provided a reliable calendar. But there were probably deeper reasons too, reasons tied to how ancient people understood the world. Many ancient cultures believed the sky was the realm of the gods. The regularity of celestial movement suggested a divine order governing the universe. The sun brought light and warmth, essential for life. The moon influenced tides and seemed to affect plant growth and animal behavior. By studying the heavens and building monuments aligned with celestial events, people were connecting themselves to this divine order. Stonehenge, in this sense, was a place where earth and sky met. Its stones were rooted in the ground but arranged to frame celestial events. Standing at Stonehenge during a solstice or other significant astronomical moment, you were literally positioned at the intersection of earthly and heavenly realms. This made Stonehenge not just an observatory, but a temple, a place where the sacred was made visible and tangible. As you lie here, growing drowsier, imagine yourself at Stonehenge on a clear night 4,000 years ago. The stones loom around you, darker shadows against the dark sky. Above, the stars shine with stunning clarity. You recognize patterns, constellations that your people have watched for generations. You know which stars herald the coming of spring, which ones mark the height of summer. You see the moon, perhaps full and bright, casting silver light on the ancient stones. You understand in a way that modern people rarely do, that you are part of something vast and eternal. The same moon you're watching was watched by your grandparents and their grandparents. It will be watched by your grandchildren and their grandchildren. The stones around you are permanent markers, connecting past, present, and future. They say, we were here, we watched, we understood.
And we built this so that you would know. This sense of continuity, of being part of a pattern larger than any individual life,
was central to what Stonehenge meant to its builders. It wasn't just about tracking the seasons for practical reasons. It was about finding your place in the cosmos, about understanding your connection to powers far greater than yourself. Stonehenge made those connections real and visible. It turned abstract astronomical knowledge into solid stone, into something you could touch and stand within. Let your thoughts drift gently as we explore the many theories about Stonehenge's purpose. Despite centuries of study, we still don't fully understand why it was built or exactly how it was used. This mystery is part of what makes Stonehenge so captivating. It invites speculation and imagination while resisting simple explanations. The earliest written mention of Stonehenge comes from Henry of Huntingdon, a medieval English historian who lived in the 1100s. He listed Stonehenge as one of the wonders of Britain, calling it a place where stones of amazing size stand like doorways. But even Henry, writing only about 800 years ago, had no idea who built Stonehenge or why. The monument was already ancient beyond memory. Medieval and Renaissance writers created legends to explain Stonehenge. One popular story claimed that the wizard Merlin brought the stones from Ireland using magic. Another suggested that Stonehenge was built by giants in the distant past. These stories tell us something important. Even when Stonehenge was younger, people found it mysterious and impressive enough to require supernatural explanation. In the 17th century, people began trying to study Stonehenge more systematically. John Aubrey, who we mentioned earlier as the discoverer of the Aubrey holes, suggested that Stonehenge was built by the ancient Druids. The Druids were the priests and wise people of the Celtic cultures that inhabited Britain before and during the Roman occupation. Aubrey's idea became very popular and persisted for centuries. There's just one problem with the Druid theory: it's wrong. The Celts and their Druids arrived in Britain around 600 BCE, more than 1500 years after Stonehenge was completed. The Druids certainly knew about Stonehenge and may have used it for their own purposes, but they didn't build it. This is a good reminder that even experts can be mistaken when evidence is limited. As archaeological methods improved in the 19th and 20th centuries, researchers began dating Stonehenge more accurately. They excavated carefully, documenting layers of soil and the objects found in them. They discovered that Stonehenge was built in stages over many centuries. They identified the sources of the different types of stone. Slowly, a more accurate picture of Stonehenge's construction emerged, but understanding when and how Stonehenge was built doesn't necessarily tell us why. This is where theories multiply. Some researchers emphasize Stonehenge's role as an astronomical observatory. Others stress its function as a temple or gathering place. Still others focus on its use as a cemetery. The truth is probably that Stonehenge served multiple purposes, and those purposes may have changed over its long history. One theory suggests Stonehenge was a healing temple. This idea comes partly from the bluestones, those special stones brought all the way from Wales. In many cultures, certain rocks are believed to have healing properties. Perhaps the bluestones were thought to have special powers. People might have come to Stonehenge seeking cures for illnesses, touching the stones or drinking water that had been in contact with them. Evidence for this theory includes the discovery of many burials near Stonehenge of individuals who had been injured or ill. Some showed signs of serious infections or wounds. Perhaps they had journeyed to Stonehenge hoping for healing, and when they died there, they were buried nearby. It's also worth noting that pilgrimages to healing shrines have been common in many cultures throughout history. Stonehenge might have been an early example of this phenomenon. Another theory focuses on sound. Some researchers have discovered that certain arrangements of stones can create unusual acoustic effects. The bluestones in particular, when struck, can produce ringing, bell-like tones. Perhaps ceremonies at Stonehenge involved striking the stones to create music or sound effects that added to the spiritual atmosphere. Some of the larger stones also seem to amplify sound, so a person speaking or chanting near them would sound louder and more impressive. Sound would have been important in rituals. Without amplification systems, creating sounds that a large crowd could hear was challenging. If Stonehenge's design naturally amplified voices or created resonant spaces, that would have made it more effective as a ceremonial center. Imagine a priest or community leader standing among the stones, their voice echoing between the massive sarsens, seeming to come from all directions at once. This would create a powerful, mysterious effect. Some theories about Stonehenge are more controversial. In the 1960s, an astronomer named Gerald Hawkins proposed that Stonehenge was an ancient computer for predicting eclipses. He argued that the arrangements of stones and holes corresponded to key astronomical numbers and could be used to forecast when eclipses would occur. Many archaeologists were skeptical of this theory. While Stonehenge clearly has astronomical alignments, using it as an eclipse predictor would require sophisticated mathematical knowledge that seems unlikely for Neolithic people. However, We shouldn't underestimate ancient astronomers. Recent research has shown that many ancient cultures understood celestial mechanics at a remarkably sophisticated level. The ancient Babylonians could predict planetary positions. The Mayans developed an extremely accurate calendar. Maybe the builders of Stonehenge were capable of more than we give them credit for. Or maybe Hawkins was seeing patterns that weren't intentionally designed. This remains a subject of debate. One of the more recent theories about Stonehenge emphasizes its role in unifying different communities. Building and using Stonehenge required cooperation between many groups of people. Different communities had to agree to contribute labor, to bring stones from distant locations, to gather for ceremonies. In this sense, Stonehenge was a project that brought people together, creating shared identity and purpose. This theory is supported by evidence from Durrington Walls and other nearby sites. Chemical analysis of pig teeth from the feast remains shows the animals came from all over Britain. People weren't just coming from the local area, they were travelling hundreds of miles. Similarly, the bluestones from Wales suggest long-distance connections and trade networks. Stonehenge was a focal point for a culture that spanned much of Britain. Perhaps Stonehenge served a purpose similar to great cathedrals in medieval Europe. These buildings took generations to construct and required resources from large regions. They were statements of religious faith, yes, but also demonstrations of wealth, power, and cultural sophistication. They brought communities together for construction and for ceremonies. Stonehenge might have played a similar role for Neolithic Britain, a monument that expressed shared beliefs and brought people together across tribal or regional boundaries. There's also a theory that Stonehenge represented the cosmos in miniature, a symbolic model of the universe. The circular arrangement could represent the horizon or the path of the sun across the sky. The inner horseshoe could symbolize the sacred center, the axis around which everything revolves. By walking into Stonehenge, entering through the stones, participants would be stepping into a representation of the cosmos itself, placing themselves at the center of creation. This idea of sacred geography, where a temple or monument represents the entire universe in symbolic form, appears in many cultures. Hindu temples are designed as cosmic diagrams. Chinese emperors built circular altars representing heaven. Perhaps Stonehenge served a similar symbolic function, making abstract cosmological ideas concrete and experiential. What's fascinating is that none of these theories necessarily contradict each other. Stonehenge could have been many things at once: an astronomical observatory, a temple, a cemetery, a healing shrine, a gathering place, and a cosmic symbol. Its purposes might have layered on top of each other over centuries as different generations added their own meanings and uses. Consider how buildings today can serve multiple purposes. A church is a place of worship, but also a community centre, a concert hall, an architectural landmark, and a repository of history and art. Stonehenge, used for more than 1,500 years by changing populations, certainly accumulated many layers of meaning and function. One thing we can be fairly certain about is that Stonehenge was a sacred place, somewhere set apart from ordinary life. The effort invested in its construction makes this clear. You don't move 84-ton stones across 140 miles for trivial reasons. You don't shape massive sarsens into precise forms unless the project matters deeply. Whatever else Stonehenge was, it was a place where the sacred became visible and tangible. Let your breathing grow slower still as you imagine standing at Stonehenge, trying to understand its purpose through the eyes of someone who lived 4,000 years ago. Your world is small in some ways. You probably never traveled more than 50 miles from where you were born. But your world is also vast in other ways. The sky stretches endlessly above you. The seasons turn in their eternal cycles. Your ancestors are all around you, their bones resting in the earth, their spirits perhaps lingering in special places like this. Stonehenge, in this context, is a link between worlds. It connects you to your ancestors, whose work you see in these stones. It connects you to distant communities who helped build this place. It connects you to the powers of the sky, the sun and moon, and stars that govern the passage of time. It connects you to the gods or spirits, whatever divine forces you believe shape the world. Standing here, you are part of something vast and timeless. This sense of connection and wonder is perhaps closer to understanding Stonehenge's true purpose than any specific theory about its function. Stonehenge was built to inspire awe, to make people feel something profound. In that sense, it still works. Even today, even surrounded by modern intrusions, Stonehenge can still make you stop and wonder. That response, that feeling of confronting something greater than yourself, is what the builders were trying to create. As you relax deeper into sleep, let's expand our view beyond Stonehenge itself to the wider landscape of ancient Britain. Stonehenge doesn't stand alone. It's part of a vast complex of prehistoric monuments that dot the countryside around Salisbury Plain. Understanding these other sites helps us understand Stonehenge better, revealing it as one element in a sacred landscape that ancient people created over thousands of years. Just 2 miles from Stonehenge lies Durrington Walls, which we've mentioned several times. This is one of the largest henge monuments in Britain, even bigger than Stonehenge itself. A henge is a circular enclosure with a bank and ditch, and Durrington Walls encloses an area almost 500 meters across. Within this enormous circle, archaeologists have found evidence of a village that existed around the same time Stonehenge was being built. This wasn't an ordinary village. Durrington Walls seems to have been a temporary settlement, a place where people came for specific purposes rather than living year-round. Excavations have uncovered the remains of hundreds of houses, all built in a similar style with wooden posts and chalk floors. These houses were occupied during midwinter, based on the evidence of the pig bones and other remains. People came to Durrington Walls by the hundreds, perhaps thousands, staying for a few weeks during the darkest part of the year. Why gather at Durrington Walls rather than at Stonehenge itself? The answer might relate to what Stonehenge meant to its builders. If Stonehenge was considered extremely sacred, people might not have been allowed to live there or perform everyday activities nearby. Durrington Walls could have been the practical base camp, where people ate, slept, and socialized, while Stonehenge remained a pure ceremonial center visited for specific rituals. A processional way connects Durrington Walls to the River Avon, which flows nearby. This avenue, marked by parallel banks and ditches, leads from the henge down to the river. At the river, there's evidence of a landing place where boats could dock. From here, another avenue follows the river south, then turns towards Stonehenge. This suggests a ceremonial journey, people arriving at Durrington Walls by boat, then walking in procession along the avenue to Stonehenge. Imagine this journey as you sink deeper into rest. You've travelled for days to reach this sacred place, maybe coming by boat down the river. You arrive at Durrington Walls, where hundreds of others have also gathered. The settlement bustles with activity. People are setting up temporary shelters, lighting fires, preparing food. You recognize some faces from your own village, but there are many strangers too. People from distant regions who speak with different accents. After a few days of feasting and preparation, the time comes for the ceremony. You join a long procession of people walking down the avenue from Durrington Walls toward the river. The winter air is cold and your breath makes clouds in front of your face.
Ahead and behind you, the line of people stretches as far as you can see.
Everyone is quiet, solemn. This is important. At the river, you turn south following the avenue. The sun is low in the sky, and shadows stretch long across the grass. You can see Stonehenge in the distance now, its stones dark against the pale winter sky. As you get closer, the monument seems to grow larger, more imposing. Finally, you arrive and pass between the great stones into the center of the circle. The ceremony begins, though what exactly it involves we can only imagine. This connection between Durrington Walls and Stonehenge, between a settlement of wood and a monument of stone, might have symbolic significance. Some archaeologists have suggested that wood represented life and the living, while stone represented death and the ancestors. Durrington Walls, built of wood, and filled with the sounds and smells of daily life, was the realm of the living. Stonehenge, built of eternal stone and housing ancestral cremations, was the realm of the dead. The journey from one to the other might have represented moving between these two states. North of Stonehenge lies another enormous monument called Avebury. This is the largest stone circle in the world, enclosing an area so vast that an entire village sits within it. The outer circle at Avebury consists of about 100 stones, some weighing more than 40 tons. These stones are less carefully shaped than those at Stonehenge. They're rough and irregular, but their size makes them no less impressive. Avebury was built around the same time as Stonehenge, part of the same great age of monument building. Inside the main circle at Avebury are two smaller stone circles. Leading away from Avebury are stone avenues, lines of standing stones that originally stretched for more than a mile across the countryside. Walking along these avenues must have been a powerful experience, passing between rows of stones that channeled your movement toward the great circles. Near Avebury rises Silbury Hill, one of the most mysterious monuments in Britain. This is an artificial mound entirely made by human hands, standing about 130 feet tall. It's the largest prehistoric mound in Europe, and estimates suggest it would have taken 4,000 people working for 10 years to build it. Yet when archaeologists have dug into Silbury Hill, they've found nothing. No burial chamber, no treasure, no obvious purpose. Why would ancient people invest so much effort into building a huge mound of earth that seems to serve no practical function? We don't know. Perhaps the process of building it was what mattered, a communal project that brought people together. Perhaps it had symbolic meaning we can't understand. Or perhaps there was something inside that has decayed completely, leaving no trace. Silbury Hill stands as a reminder that even with modern archaeology, some ancient mysteries remain impenetrable. The Cursus is another puzzling monument near Stonehenge. This is a pair of parallel ditches with banks running between them, stretching for nearly 2 miles across the landscape. It was built around 3500 BCE, making it older than the stone circles at Stonehenge. The Cursus encloses a long, narrow space, almost like an avenue or processional way, but it doesn't seem to lead anywhere particular. Some researchers have suggested the Cursus was used for racing or ritual processions. Others think it might mark a symbolic boundary or represent astronomical alignments. The eastern end of the Cursus aligns with the point where the sun rises on the summer solstice as seen from certain positions.
This might not be coincidence.
Perhaps the Cursus was an early attempt to mark this important solar event, predating the stone circles by centuries. What strikes you when you look at all these monuments together is the incredible amount of work ancient communities invested in shaping their landscape. They weren't content to simply live on the land. They transformed it, creating features that had meaning and purpose for them. Every time they saw Silbury Hill rising against the sky, or walked past the stones at Avebury, or looked toward Stonehenge on the horizon, they were reminded of their shared beliefs and traditions. This process of creating a sacred landscape happened in other parts of Britain too. In Orkney, a group of islands off the northern coast of Scotland, Neolithic people built an extraordinary complex of monuments including Maeshowe, a chambered tomb aligned with the winter solstice, the Ring of Brodgar, a massive stone circle, and Skara Brae, a remarkably well-preserved Stone Age village. These monuments are older than Stonehenge's stone circles, proof that sophisticated building traditions existed in Britain for many centuries. The fact that similar monuments appear across Britain suggests shared cultural traditions spreading over large areas. Ideas travelled, even in a time without writing or fast transportation. Perhaps people made pilgrimages to famous sites and brought back ideas to their home regions. Perhaps travelling craftspeople or priests spread knowledge of how to build these monuments. Whatever the mechanism, there was clearly a widespread tradition of building circles, henges, and other monuments in prehistoric Britain. Let your thoughts drift across this ancient landscape as you fall deeper into sleep. Picture Britain 5,000 years ago dotted with these monuments. From hilltops you can see several at once, each marking a sacred place, each representing thousands of hours of communal labor. The landscape itself becomes a kind of text, one that people could read and understand, that told them stories about their ancestors, their gods, and their place in the cosmos. This landscape is still there, at least partially. Many monuments have been damaged or destroyed over the millennia. Stones have been broken up for building materials or removed by farmers clearing fields. Earthworks have been ploughed flat, but enough remains to hint at the richness of what once existed. When you visit Stonehenge today, try to see it not as an isolated monument, but as one bright point in a constellation of sacred sites that once covered the land. As you drift towards sleep, let's follow Stonehenge's story forward through time, exploring how it has been perceived and used by different cultures across the millennia. After the Beaker people, after the building stopped around 1600 BCE, Stonehenge stood on Salisbury Plain, silent but not forgotten. Different peoples came to regard it with wonder, fear, reverence, or curiosity, each finding their own meanings in its ancient stones. By the time the Romans conquered Britain in 43 CE, Stonehenge was already more than 3,000 years old. The Romans were great engineers and builders themselves. They constructed roads, aqueducts, and temples across their empire. Yet even they seem to have been impressed by Stonehenge. Roman coins and pottery have been found near the monument, evidence that people in the Roman period visited the site. What they thought about it, we can only guess. Perhaps they associated it with the native British gods, or simply wondered at its age and mystery. After the Romans left Britain in the early 400s CE, the country entered a period of upheaval. New groups arrived from continental Europe, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who would eventually give England its name. These Anglo-Saxon peoples brought their own customs and beliefs. They were pagans, worshipping gods like Woden and Thor. Later, they gradually converted to Christianity. The Anglo-Saxons knew about Stonehenge. In their legends, they attributed it to giants or to supernatural forces. The name Stonehenge itself is Anglo-Saxon, probably meaning hanging stones or stones with lintels, referring to the way the horizontal stones are supported by the uprights. That the monument received a name in Anglo-Saxon shows it was significant enough to warrant specific identification. Medieval Christians sometimes viewed Stonehenge with suspicion. Some writers suggested it was a pagan temple, a place where devil worship or witchcraft had occurred. Others were simply curious about its origins. Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in the 1130s, created the legend about Merlin bringing the stones from Ireland. According to Geoffrey, the stones had healing properties, which is interesting because it echoes the theory we discussed earlier about Stonehenge as a healing temple. Perhaps folk memories of its ancient purpose survived in garbled form. During the medieval and early modern periods, Stonehenge began to suffer serious damage. Visitors broke off pieces of stone to keep as souvenirs or curiosities. Some stones were broken up and carted away for building materials. In 1620, the Duke of Buckingham dug a large pit in the centre of Stonehenge, searching for treasure, damaging the site significantly. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, various people carved their names into the stones, graffiti that's still visible today. Yet Stonehenge also began to attract serious scholarly attention. John Aubrey surveyed the site in the 1660s, making careful measurements and discovering the ring of pits that now bears his name. His contemporary, Inigo Jones, the famous architect, also studied Stonehenge and concluded it must have been a Roman temple. This was wrong, as we now know, but it represented an attempt to understand the monument through systematic observation. In the 18th century, William Stukely made detailed drawings of Stonehenge and other ancient sites. Stukely was fascinated by the Druids and helped popularize the idea that they built Stonehenge. His drawings are valuable historical records showing stones that have since fallen or been removed. Stukely also recognized Stonehenge's astronomical alignments, particularly the summer solstice sunrise, showing that even hundreds of years ago, observers could detect the monument's relationship to the sky. The Romantic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries embraced Stonehenge as a symbol of Britain's mysterious ancient past. Poets and painters depicted the monument as a sublime, atmospheric place. Artists showed it silhouetted against stormy skies or moonlight, emphasizing its age and mystery. This romantic interpretation of Stonehenge as a place of atmosphere and emotion, rather than just archaeological interest, continues to influence how we see it today. The development of modern archaeology in the 19th century brought new approaches to studying Stonehenge. Excavations began to reveal the sequence of construction phases. Dating techniques allowed researchers to establish when different parts were built. Scientists identified the sources of the stones, solving at least part of the mystery of where the materials came from. Slowly, systematically, archaeologists pieced together Stonehenge's complex history. In the early 20th century, Stonehenge came under threat from the expanding modern world. Roads passed close by, visitors had unrestricted access and were damaging the stones, and there was even talk of building on nearby land. In 1915, Stonehenge was put up for auction. It was purchased by Cecil Chubb, a local man who, 3 years later, gave it to the nation. This marked the beginning of Stonehenge's status as a protected national monument. Throughout the 20th century, archaeological work at Stonehenge continued. In the 1950s and 60s, many fallen stones were re-erected and others were stabilized with concrete to prevent further collapse. These interventions were controversial. Some felt they were necessary to preserve the monument. Others argued they changed Stonehenge's character, making it too neat and tidy compared to its previous state of romantic decay. The 1960s and 70s saw Stonehenge become associated with counterculture movements. Hippies and New Age believers began gathering at the site, especially for the summer solstice. They saw Stonehenge as a spiritual place, a connection to an ancient wisdom they felt modern society had lost. The annual Free Festival at Stonehenge became famous, attracting thousands of people. In 1985, authorities banned the festival, leading to a confrontation between police and festival goers, known as the Battle of the Beanfield. Today, access to Stonehenge is carefully controlled. The stones themselves are roped off, and visitors cannot enter the circle except on special occasions or with advance permission. This restriction is necessary to protect the monument from damage, but it also changes the experience.
Ancient peoples could walk right up to the stones, touch them, stand among them.
Modern visitors view them from a distance, which gives a very different impression. Yet Stonehenge continues to fascinate and inspire. More than 1 million people visit each year. For the summer and winter solstices, thousands gather near the monument to mark these ancient moments. Modern Druids and pagans have reclaimed Stonehenge as a spiritual site, conducting ceremonies that attempt to honor or recreate ancient practices. Scientists continue to study it with ever more sophisticated techniques, learning new details about its construction and use. Recent discoveries keep adding to our knowledge. In the last 20 years, archaeologists have found new monuments in the area around Stonehenge using techniques like ground-penetrating radar and aerial photography. They've discovered that Stonehenge was part of an even larger complex than previously thought. Analysis of human remains buried at the site has revealed where people came from and what they ate, adding human detail to the bare facts of construction dates and stone sources. Perhaps most intriguingly, researchers have begun to understand Stonehenge as part of a sound landscape. Some of the stones, especially the bluestones, produce musical tones when struck. Acoustic studies show that the arrangement of stones would have affected how sound traveled within the circle, creating an unusual auditory environment. This adds a new dimension to our understanding. Stonehenge wasn't just something to see, it was something to hear. A place where sound behaved in special ways that added to its sacred atmosphere. As you slip into the edge of sleep, imagine Stonehenge through all these centuries. Picture it new and complete, its surfaces fresh and pale, surrounded by crowds of Neolithic people, conducting ceremonies we can barely imagine. See it aging slowly through the Bronze and Iron Ages, still used but increasingly mysterious even to those who gathered there. Watch Roman soldiers pass by, looking up at the ancient stones with curiosity. See medieval peasants cross themselves nervously as they hurry past this pagan monument. Picture antiquarians in wigs and breeches carefully measuring the stones by candlelight. See Victorian ladies and gentlemen arriving in carriages to sketch and paint the ruins. Watch hippies dancing between the stones during the free festivals. See modern crowds gathering for the solstice, their phones held up to capture the sunrise. All these people, across 4,500 years, responding to the same stones, finding their own meanings in this ancient place. Stonehenge has outlasted the civilization that built it. It has outlasted countless other civilizations and will likely outlast our own. The stones will still be there centuries from now, still mysterious, still inspiring wonder. In a world of constant change, where buildings rise and fall within human lifetimes, Stonehenge represents something permanent, a connection to the deep past that will extend into the deep future. This permanence is itself meaningful. The people who built Stonehenge created something that would outlive them by thousands of years. They knew they would never see the completed monument, yet they worked on it anyway. They built for their children's children's children, for people they would never know, in service of beliefs and purposes that mattered more than their individual lives. Sleep well, knowing that some things endure, some mysteries remain, some stones still stand.